Mining all day, mining all night. When will I find something? Whoa! Woo, boys! Looks like we struck gold. I am thrilled to announce that our partners over at Secondhand Geek are sponsoring the channel with an incredible giveaway. That's right. By signing up to their website using my affiliate link down in the description below, you will automatically be entered into a draw to win the brand new 2025 Leagues of Votann Christmas Battle Force box. Woo! Secondhand Geek is an incredible platform for all of your second-hand used miniature purchases. It offers a reliable, reputable, and secure platform for you to buy and sell your minis. So don't forget to sign up today using my affiliate link down in the description below for a chance to win the brand new box. What are you waiting for, lads? Hello, my fellow kin. Welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we are going to be trying something a little bit different. Again. So with the World Championship of Warhammer having just completed this past weekend in Atlanta, containing some of the very best players in the world pitted against each other, I figured this would be a fantastic opportunity for us to do kind of like a meta deep dive video and take a look at how these top players are utilizing the Leagues of Votann, kind of what that representation looks like at that high level, the detachment breakdown in terms of representation as well, and then we're going to go even more thorough than that and see how these detachments are actually performing, hopefully answering at a competitive level what is the best Leagues of Votann detachment that you can play. But of course, a massive, massive thank you to all of our amazing channel members whose ongoing support help make these videos possible. Thank you guys so much. It really does mean a lot. So in terms of today's video, we're going to kick things off taking a look first at the actual representation at this event for Leagues of Votann. How many of the best players in the world were actually running Leagues of Votann, and how did they end up doing on average? We're then going to look at each and every single one of the 11 lists that were played at this event, and then we're going to start our deep dive performance breakdown and bring in some math, and then wrap the video up, of course, with our key takeaways and inferences we can make based on the data. If you guys are interested in more videos like this, more like meta watch focused, specialized of course on Leagues of Votann, let me know in the comments below. This was actually a lot of fun to put together, so maybe we'll do something like this after each major event, and then maybe something a little bit more simplified on a more interval basis like monthly or quarterly, just to see how Leagues of Votann are performing in general. With that said, let's jump on in. Just to preface where I got my data from in this video, everything was taken based off of 40K Event Tracker and corroborated with data available on Best Coast pairings. Now, with that said, out of the event here, I have on my end 402 players total that attended this event in the end, and out of those 402 players, 11 were playing Leagues of Votann. And again, of course, this tournament representing the World Championship of Warhammer has mostly the best players in the world. So this is a very good data pool to look at in terms of how, at a top competitive level, the Leagues of Votann are being viewed. So we have a 2.73% faction representation that was taken at this event, just being 11 players. So a little bit on the lower end. When we look over at the win rate, so the whole overall win rate for everybody who played Leagues of Votann at this event, we see that there were 88 games total that were played because each one of the 11 players played 8 games. And out of those 88 games, there were 43 wins. So this takes our win rate to approximately 48.86%, which is about 49% win rate. So, you know, it seems a little bit low, but it's well within the bounds of what a healthy army win rate should look like. I think GW coined it like the Goldilocks zone for where they want their armies to be in, which was like, I think 45% to 55% or like something like that. We are kind of smack in the middle of that. As always, perfectly balanced. Now, in terms of the actual detachment breakdown, so what were people playing when they decided to bring Leagues of Votann to this event? This is where things get a little bit more interesting. So again, keep in mind, this is a really small sample size because we only have 11 players that attended this event. But when we do look at the numbers, we see 2 players opted for Brandfast, 2 players for Needguard, 3 on Delve, and 4 on Hearthband, making Hearthband the most popular choice and Brandfast and Needguard 2 of the least popular options. So before we go into the actual win rates and some of the stats in terms of how well these detachments scored in terms of victory points, we're going to first dive into the lists. If you don't care about seeing what the lists are at this event, then you could fast forward to whatever time I'm going to put here in post right now on the screen. Otherwise, we'll take a look at those lists in just a moment. All right, so in terms of lists, the first one we have up here is from Drew Salsborn taking Delve Assault Shift. Drew's most famously known on the channel for his Hearthband list that was recently featured in one of our videos. He decided to switch gears over and shift into Delve instead. So he was taking a Memnir Strategist with the Delve Worker Navigator Enhancement. This is the one that allows you to revive your Berserks. He then had a Memnir Strategist, Uthar the Destined, a couple squads, several squads, I should say, 10, 20, 30, 40, 45 Berserks, a good mix of plasma axes and concussion mauls. We then had a single Capri Carrier. We had triple Hecaton Land Fortress with the heavy Magna Rail Cannon. We had a set of 10 Jaegers to round off mission play in the list as well. So we're really light on mission play pieces. Ton of output, of course, with the Berserks here. Actually pushing into 45 when we usually at this point have seen only about 30 to 35 taken. And taking a third land fortress as well for more staying power and board presence and just forcing commitments out of his opponent where the rest of his army can capitalize on that, as we saw with his playstyle with Hearthband. Next up, we have Mathieu Clerc over here with his refined Hearthband list. We made a nice nod to this in our Hearthband detachment video, and like I said, these are some of the best players in the world. So as we go through these lists here, you're definitely going to recognize a few of them from featuring on the channel in terms of previous performances that they had with their Leagues of Votann. So for Mathieu Clerc, he's running Hearthband. They carried me for 2 years. They get to see the world. Mad respect. He's running a call with the Quake Multi-Generator. This is the -1 to hit enhancement that you could throw out on a target that you shoot. He has 10 warriors, double carrier, 3 sets of Brokier Thunderkin with Gravitons. He has a 5-man Berserk squad, and then he has a single 10-man brick of Hearthguard, of course, with the plasma guns, a 5-man squad of Hearthguard with the plasma guns, double land fortress, a squad of bikes for uppy downy pressure, 2 sets of 10 Jaegers that are going to combat squad into 5 and 5, and then he's running small units of Steeljacks, 2 sets of the melee Steeljacks here as well. So pretty nice, well-rounded list. It has everything you need in a Hearthband list. I think you have the units in Deep Strike, you have the anti-tank that comes in from reserves or rides inside of a land fortress with the Berserk squad, and you have a couple heavy-hitting melee pieces as well that force larger activations out of your opponent. Another channel legend, Junior Afledji, coming in over here with his Need Guard list, taking a Brokier Iron Master, a double Memnir, one having Oathbound Speculator, so this is the +1 to wound enhancement if you spend 3 yield points, and also giving you reroll wound rolls of 1. He has Dead Reckoning for the extra yield point generation, Uthar the Destined, double Capri Carrier, a squad of 6 Thunderkin, 2 squads of 3 Thunderkin, double Hecaton Land Fortress, double 10-man Jaeger squads, that combat squad. We then have a 6-man Vulcanite Steeljack unit, a 6-man Steeljack melee unit, 3 Capri Defenders to round off the list. So pretty interesting here. I'm seeing some kind of resemblance to the list Jordan and I were kind of talking about. So it's interesting to see that we were kind of in the right headspace with how we designed our lists, leading into these pieces that force, again, larger commitments out of your opponent, which then you can respond using the efficiency in the output of this detachment. It's one that generally plays Warhammer best, and I think we'll see that represented in the stats a little bit later. Next up, we have Petit Aurélien taking his Need Guard Oathband list. He is running a call with, again, Oathbound Speculator for +1 to wound, rerolling wound rolls of 1, Dead Reckoning on a Memnir and Uthar the Destined. Pretty staple start to one of your Need Guard lists. He has double Carrier, a 6-man Thunderkin, 2 3-man Thunderkins, a 10-man Hearthguard brick that are going to be in Deep Strike with the call, double Land Fortress. He's running double bikes, and then 2 sets of 10 Jaegers who are combat squatted for mission play, and then a single 6-man Steeljack melee unit, which I guess here is acting as like your counterpunch piece, threaten heroics, and just be really annoying to shift on the center objective in most cases. We then have Chris Jung taking Uthar the Destined in his Hearthband list. So we have Uthar, a call with Iron Skin, which gives him +1 or +2 to his wound count. We then have 2 sets of Hearthkin Warriors. We have a single Capricus Carrier with a Sagittar. So Sagittar is going to split one squad into 10 warriors. The other one's going to be a solo squad of 10. We have 3 Brokir Thunderkin with Gravitons. We have 1, 2, 3 5-man Hearthguard units in Deep Strike. And then we have double Hecaton Land Fortress and 3 sets of 3 bikes with, of course, the 10-man Jaeger squad that will be combat squadded through the carrier. For our first Brandfast list, this one is actually run by Matt McWaters, who's my team captain on Slugfest. We spoke a little bit about this list, bouncing some ideas off of each other, and what he ended up landing on here, which I thought was really interesting, was for Brandfast, the Brokir Ironmaster with the Trivarg Cyber Implant Enhancement. So this gives you access to Sustained Hits 2 when you disembark, rather than Sustained Hits 1. Or you could spend yield points to get Sustained Hits 2 all the time. So it basically just lets you dump your yield points so you have better control over which instance of your doctrine you're in, if it's hostile or fortified takeover. We then have the double Grimnir, which is an interesting choice, and then a single Memnir strategist who's going to be there for yield point manipulation. For the battle line, we have 2 squads of 10 warriors. Both are going to be led by Grimnirs here, and we are going to be splitting them up a little bit later in the list. We have a single Capri Carrier, double Sagittar, so we could split either those 2 10-mans up into 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4 sets of 5, or we can have a single set of 10 be split into 2 5s, and then there's one big set of 10, and then you could have those Grimnirs be 1 onto 10, 1 onto 5. You just get a little bit more control over how you want to activate it or send out your resources to trade. We then have a squad of 6 Thunderkin with the SP Conversion Beamers, obviously attached to the Ironmaster, 2 sets of 3s with the Gravitons, a 10-man Berserk Brick as kind of just like our You Cannot Disrespect Me melee unit. We then have 2 Hecaton Land Fortresses, we have the double Pioneers for the 3x3, and then the single 10-man Jaeger Brick that is going to be split through the carrier. Next up, we have Shane Watts with his Juggernaut of Hashut here, taking Delve Assault Shift. Shane is running a Brokir Ironmaster with the Delve Work Navigator Enhancement. I quite like it on the Ironmaster because he does get access to Lone Operative if he's within 3 inches of the Land Fortress. You can kind of string him out in a nice line. In your movement phase, have control over where he can safely start regenerating your Berserk models. We then have the Memnir Strategist with the Multi-Wave System Jammer, and then Uthar the Destined. For the total amount of Berserks we're taking, we're running 10, 20, 30, 5, 40 Berserks. So far we're seeing the Berserk count here is significantly higher than what people were initially speculating on Codex release being around 30, 35. We've added 10 to that in almost every case here. A nice mix, of course, of Plasma Axes and the Concussion Gauntlets. We then have a Capricus Carrier here. We're running a single Chthonian Earth Shaker to make use of the strat support to reduce the movement speed of one of the enemy's units. We have a single Hecaton Land Fortress. We have 2 squads of 3 bikes, double Hernkin Jaegers here that one is going to be combat squad and the other one I guess will just be a large 10-man squad. And then we have a 6-man Steeljack unit with the Vulcanite Disintegrator guns. Our next list here taken to the event was run by Christopher Drazan. This was our Hearthband list with a Call Bastion Shield, so Armor Contempt within, I believe it's 12 inches, then you could expand it to 18 inches if you spend a yield point. We have another Call, Memnir Strategist, and Uthar the Destined, so quite character heavy here. Double Capri Carriers, 2 3-man of Thunderkin. We have a big 10-man brick of Hearthguard, and then 2 smaller 5-man squads of Hearthguard here. Everybody's running the plasma guns. We then have double Hecaton Land Fortress, a squad of 10 Jaegers, another squad of 10 Jaegers, and then, of course, we have some Vulcanite Disintegrator Steeljack. So we could kind of already start seeing a little bit of a trend here in terms of unit selection per detachment. They do tend to telegraph a little bit in terms of what you're taking and why you're taking it. It's a detachment that, of course, is quite reliant on rapid ingress and deep strike, and the Steeljacks with Vulcanite Disintegrators give you pretty decent shooting for chaff clearing, things that are going to start pushing you back. You overwatch on force, for example, when you hit fortify. So just like a nice piece to have in this archetype. Next up, we have another Heartband list by James Cummings. This one is running a call with Bastion Shield yet again, Uthar the Destined, a 10-man warrior squad, Capricus Carrier, two squads of 3 Brokir Thunderkin taking Gravs, and a single 6-man with the Graviton Blast Cannon as well. So leaning a little heavier here into your anti-tank coming in from reserves. We then have a squad of 5 Berserks. We have a single Earthshaker, and then a 10-man Hearthguard Brick and 2 5s yet again. We have a single Hecaton Land Fortress, 2x3 bikes, a Jaeger squad of 10, and we have a cute little inclusion of a Capricus Defender. We don't see that too often. Next, we have Tom Kaiser taking Brandfast. So this is our second Brandfast list we look at here. Taking, of course, the Iron Master with the Trivarg Cyber Implant. Double Grimnir here yet again, and Uthar the Destined. Interesting choice. We then have 10, 20, 30 Hearthkin Warriors, the humble backbone to any Votann army. We have double carriers over here. We have a 3-man Brokir Thunderkin squad, double 6-man with the SP conversion beamers. We have 2 Hecaton Land Fortresses, double Hernkin Pioneers, and then we have the double Jaegers. So really heavy on mission play here, capitalizing on Brandfast's vehicle kind of benefits and incentive to run. And then of course you also have just like the heavy hitting damage pieces that are going to be benefiting from all of those buffs. Really strong mission play, really strong primary play as well here. Our last list taken at this event was from Hannah Hacken, and this one was Delve Assault Shift as well. So we have the Brokir Iron Master with Delve Work Navigator, Uthar the Destined. We are running 10, 20, 30, 5 Berserk. So a little bit more in line with what the initial predictions were for running Delve Assault Shift, 35 Berserks here. Double Capricus Carrier, Chthonian Earthshakers, double Land Fortresses, double 10-man Jaegers. They get the Combat Squad for mission play. Then we have a split here of a 3-man Vulcanite unit, and then a second 3-man Vulcanite unit as well. So a little bit more spread in terms of unit activations here, rather than some of those more elite pieces. So with all of those lists out of the way, we now have a better understanding of what was actually taken. And we see that here through that detachment representation with 2 players on Brandfast, 2 on Needguard, 4 on Hearthband, and 3 on Delve. When we look at the actual win rate performance of each one of these detachments, things get quite interesting as well. So we see Needguard here actually has the highest win rate at 62.5%. And I put here at the bottom, for the x-axis, you'll see the detachment that was played, and then in parentheses, you have the total number of games that were played for that detachment, just as a more easy to reference visualization. Next up, we have in second place Hearthband coming in at a 50% win rate. So they had 32 games played, meaning they won exactly half of that. And then for Delve in third at 45.83%. And then last place, we have Brandfast at 37.5% win rate. So actually losing significantly more games than it was able to win at this event. Now, I wanted to take this data and go one step further. Rather than just seeing what was winning, I wanted to kind of draw a little bit more inference from this, right? Because, like, again, this is one of the highest tiered events in the world for Warhammer with the best players there. And I felt like this is a really good representation of what the army can achieve. So in order to do that, I decided to run some descriptive statistics on this. And the first thing I did was separate each one of the detachments and compile manually every single score that was obtained. So it was quite a bit of work. Don't expect this for any like month meta videos. That's what I was talking about before. Like, you know, if there's a big event, we'll definitely do this again. But I think if we're going to do like a regular interval monthly one, there's no way I could compile manually like hundreds of events. It's impossible. But for this event, it was pretty self-contained, which made it quite easy to do. So for Needguard, I have here 3 categories, right? Just in general for all of these of Votann. I have the average score that was obtained. So this takes basically all the wins, all the losses. What score did the detachment get? What score did each player obtain? And then I compile all of that and push it into one detachment category. I then have the average win rate and the average loss rate in a similar note. So essentially what I did here again, just to summarize that, is I took all the scores of all the players and I organized them categorically by what detachment they were playing. And then I averaged both the wins and the losses to get the average score for each detachment that is holding basically all the players that played it. And then did the same thing for just the wins and just the losses. And what we see here is some really fascinating information. So Needguard coming in with the highest win rate was not actually the detachment that had the most highest average score. In fact, it was actually smack in the middle. So what we see here is that the average score, so the average of victory points that were obtained in Needguard games across all the games was 67.5. The average score when that detachment won games, specifically, so excluding the losses, was 75.8. And then the average loss for when this detachment would lose games was 53.8. Now, when we compare this to something like Delve, for example, we see for Delve, it actually had a much, I say much, but it's all relative, it had a higher ceiling than Needguard for the average score earned in a game, being 69.25. And when it did win games, here I would say it won substantially more victory points than Needguard did when it was able to push for a win. This makes a lot of sense, and we'll talk about this more towards the conclusion in our takeaways, but when you consider how this detachment's macro strategy works and what it does, it's a detachment that's able to push further differentials. However, it comes at the expense of being less consistent and less reliable at doing so. And I think this is reflected here inside of the stats. Next, when we look at the average loss, we see that, surprisingly for me, the average loss here is actually still higher than with Needguard. So your floor, in terms of your points that you can obtain on a loss, is actually higher than what you would get with Needguard. This took me by surprise. Next up for Hearthband, we see the average score just for all the games, wins and losses, is 68.38. So on average, if you played Hearthband, you were pulling in 68.38 points per game. And then here when we have an average win, we're lower than Delve but higher than Needguard at 81.3 victory points on average when there was a win. For the loss, we're somewhere between Needguard and Delve, being at about 55.44. Now, the most interesting poll that I did here for the stats is definitely Brandfast. Now, if you recall, Brandfast actually had the lowest win rate by quite a bit when we looked at our win rate versus detachment breakdown in the bar graph just above. However, when we look at this table of descriptive statistics, what we see is that the average score for Brandfast is the highest one compared to all the other detachments. Furthermore, when Brandfast was able to win, the score ceiling was significantly higher than all the other detachments, even more so than Needguard. And I say significantly, I don't mean statistically significantly, I just mean looking at the raw information here, the statistics that are here. We'll talk more about that again a little bit later. When we look at the average loss, we still see that this trend continues. Whereas all the other detachments have like a floor, so the ceiling being their wins, there's like a floor for their losses. What we actually see for Brandfast is it has the highest floor as well. So even if you lose a game with Brandfast, your point floor is actually higher than what you would get with the other detachments. Now, of course, massive asterisks here, right? Like the sample size at this event for Votann is extremely small. It's 11 players. So obviously, you're going to see the swing of player skill a little bit more here in these results that are reported. However, I still think that it's, first of all, very interesting data. And second, I think it's really important data because it does kind of support what a lot of people would expect to see out of these detachments based on their macro strategy and how the detachment wants to play the game. Now, after getting these averages here, the next thing I wanted to look at was kind of how far apart the average score differential was between each category. And the reason for that is pretty simple. So we're going to look at standard deviation. And I think that it's extremely important to have this information here to better contextualize the average. Why is standard deviation important? Well, essentially, think about it like this. If you have a game of Warhammer that's played, and you tell me at the end the average score of this game was 50 victory points, I could say, oh, okay, thank you for that information. However, there are several different types of games that could have been played, several different types of scores that were obtained in order to get that 50 average between the two players, right? Like one player could have got 100 victory points and the other one 0. That's a 50 average. Whereas the second game could have been somebody got 55 points and the other guy got 45 points. That's also a 50-point average. So the story behind the score, the story behind the average is not fully told by just looking at the average. You need to take in mind what that standard deviation is, because the standard deviation tells you on average how far these scores are from your mean, the mean being the average. So with the standard deviation here on the screen, which I added after each set of averages, what you're really seeing here is kind of like the spread of variability between the scores that were earned. So you kind of look at this and say like, okay, for Need Guard, the average win, the scores obtained when there was a win on average were 75.8, and the standard deviation is about 10, right? So the majority of points that were earned, the majority of scores we see in this data set fall between 75.80 plus or minus 9.83, right, for the standard deviation here. So really what we're saying is there's a much more narrow scope in terms of points that were earned, meaning that they're more consistent, right? The wins that were held here were more consistently close together for the majority of scores. Now, it might be a little bit hard to kind of like conceptualize this and see it with these numbers here, but there are a couple that I really want to call out and focus on. And what we see is, for namely, the win averages. If we look at that spread that I just said, right, for Need Guard being about 9.83, right? It's like almost like 10, so plus or minus 75. So 75 plus or minus 10 is really where you're going to see most of those scores land, so like up to like 85 and like down to like 65. We see this kind of like really consistently across all the different score levels, that this standard deviation is relatively even, except at one place where it stands out quite substantially, and this is for Brandfast. So for Brandfast, when we look at an average win for Brandfast and the points being about 84.5 on average when there is a Brandfast win at this event, we see the standard deviation is actually 5. This is effectively half of literally all the other ones. That means that that narrow scope of plus or minus 9.83 for Need Guard is much tighter when we look at Brandfast. So for Brandfast specifically, we're really looking at a marginal difference of like plus or minus 5 points for the spread of data here, the average, the majority, the spread of data that's going to be around what makes up these average win counts. So what that really means is that Brandfast, despite being the lowest win rate, has actually the highest ceiling and floor for point scoring potential, and is the most consistent at it, which I thought was really interesting. To make this a little bit easier to understand, I ended up running a coefficient of variation here on the data. So this is really just like you're taking that standard deviation relative to the mean and you're turning it into like a percent essentially, which is just helpful for us to more easily compare like what the degree of variability is between these average scores. And what we see here is that if you look at it, they're all relatively close together. Now there is like, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary, but there is kind of like a kind of like cutoffs you could make with this, where it's like, oh, if something is above like 20% here, that actually means that the spread is significantly large, right? Like it's quite big, and that the data is more variable. I didn't end up doing anything like that. I just wanted to kind of look at this and talk about it for what it appeared to be. So like between the groups, what we see here is really like for all the detachments, they're all relatively close and comparable, which again, we'll talk about a little bit later as to why that is, except for Brandfast, which I called out here, seems to be the most tight in terms of what its score differences are when we look at those averages. The thing I want to say was regarding the average wins and the average loss. And as you can imagine, there seems to be more like control or less variability when we look at the towards ceiling push of winning. So as you're winning more games, like, and your average win is accounted for, your differences in score seem to be much tighter than when we look at what happens when you're losing. And this kind of makes sense intuitively, right? Because when you're winning a game, there's kind of like this ceiling you're building towards. And at a certain point, it just becomes like, okay, like, did I slightly play Warhammer a little bit better against this top player in the world, right? I'm not going to just run them over completely. Or did I get like a good draw here or an unlucky draw? So we kind of see like it always kind of tapers off at around whatever this average win is, being like, looks like 75 to 85 points across all the detachments. When we look at the losses, it's a lot harder to have that control when you're in a losing position, right? Because you're no longer in control of the game or in control of the scoring. You're kind of in survival mode or trying to catch up depending on how that game goes. So if you're getting like tabled really badly, for instance, from one game to a next, which you were just playing regular 40K and your opponent got a better draw towards the end, that disparity is going to show a lot more. And that's kind of what we see here with these much larger bands of CV and these much higher standard deviation levels, is that the disparity, the difference in scores that make up that average, the spread is much larger than when we look at what happens with wins. In short, one interpretation of this is that when Votann loses games, the variability in terms of scores earned during those losses, those games that are losses, tend to be much larger and more varying than when Votann win. When Votann win, the score differences between games of victories seem to be a lot tighter in terms of the data set. So you could look at this and maybe think to yourself like, okay, maybe that means when Votann does play games and wins, you know, regardless of who you're playing against, when you get that win, you're kind of always clustered around the same data point, like the same kind of average score that you could get across your games. However, maybe there are some really bad matchups here that when Votann plays into, they kind of struggle to excel at, or maybe a particular play pattern that an opponent can do that either kind of pins you back or stops you from playing regular Warhammer. We see that kind of disparity happen in points when they lose. So what does this all really mean? Well, I think for the key takeaways here, the most important thing I could stress is that our sample size is extremely, extremely small. We have just like 2 players for a couple of the detachments, 11 total. It's not enough for us to make any inferences and apply them globally at a statistically significant level. You just can't. However, I still think that there's a lot of value in talking about the descriptive statistics here because they tell us some surface level data about these detachments, how they play, how they work, and how well they perform that perhaps we could start looking for in larger data pools. So what do I mean by that? For example, if we look at Delve, right? Delve was a detachment that was one of the more popular choices at this event. And when we look at some of the score averages here, we see that for Delve, it does have one of the higher ceilings, right? Being at 83%, and the average score being second just to Brandfast. We also see that it has one of the higher levels of variability looking at that CV percent, specifically for average score. So what this tells us is that Delve is a popular detachment because it probably has access to a lot of tools that high-level competitive players are looking for in an army. Things like advance and charge, things like extra movement capabilities, things like consistency in output with the reroll wound stratagem, melee threats that could run around the board and tag things up. So there are a lot of powerful tools in this detachment that lend to its ability to push for a higher margin of the score differential. And part of that, I think, is also seen when we look at team events. A lot of people talk about how Delve is the go-to for teams because it really lets you push that differential. And we see this here reflected in the results. However, it also tends to be one of the most variable detachments in terms of where these scores are landing, just because of how inconsistent it is. You have all these powerful tools, but at the end of the day, you're a weapon skill 4 army that doesn't have access to rerolling hit rolls, and your opponent can very easily dictate if you get +1 to hit or not. So this makes you very inconsistent. You have 4-up feel no pains. You don't really have the tools to be as reliable as some of these other detachments in output with something maybe like Hearthband, which is why Hearthband might be a popular choice here as well. So when we look at all of this data, what are some of our key takeaways? Again, really small sample size here, but I do think there's important things to take away like we just saw with Delve. And in terms of what the most popular detachments were, we see that they were Hearthband and Delve for the exact reasons I just specified before. Very likely that these are armies that can push your kit, right, the toolkit available, it allows you to push your score differential a lot further than some of these other detachments do. And Hearthband carries the consistency that Delve might be lacking. When we look at highest win rate percent, we see that Needguard is, by a long shot, the one that is significantly ahead of everything else. And Brandfast is, in contrast to this, the lowest win rate out of all of them. Now, I think something to be said here about Needguard having the highest win rate is that Needguard is largely regarded as the most play Warhammer 40k detachment available to us. It lets you play the game really well. And if your opponent lets you play that game, then you're going to obviously be able to score quite well. If you're able to out 40k your opponent, essentially. Brandfast also has the tools to play good 40k, but it kind of suffers in regard to having less damage output than Needguard does on average. And what this means is that your opponent could kind of play around this by either A, rushing you before you hit fortify position, or fortify takeover, I should say, or just denying you the ability to use some of your primary acquiring tools. Like the disembark strat, for example. If you're forced to just keep fighting, you're not really getting the benefit of using these abilities. Brandfast and Delve tend to have the highest average score totals. And when we look at Delve, like I said, it just seems to be able to push that margin quite high because you lean into some of the toolkits that top 40k players really value inside of top tournament lists. If you look at what ended up winning Worlds, it was always really highly mobile armies that are able to tie things up and threaten your home objective, right? That threat range projection, it needs to be really high, and that's what you get out of Delve. When you look at Brandfast specifically, what we see is that it has the highest average scores for both wins and losses. So you have a much higher score floor than you would with some of these other detachments. I wrote lower score floor here. That's a mistake. What that means really is that with Brandfast, you seem to be able to score more points than these other detachments, even if you lose a game. So what that's kind of telling me here is that the detachment has all the tools available to it to be able to get your own points and kind of ignore what your opponent is doing, maybe through the use of some of your strat supports like the 6-inch disembark, where you could steal primary or secure your own primary as well, making it difficult for your opponent to interact with you. However, maybe you don't necessarily have the tools to be able to counter some of these other meta threats that are going to pressure you and just eventually dominate and overwhelm you in the game. Even if you score quite high, they'll just be faster than you, for instance. Something like Eldari, maybe. When we look at Needguard and Brandfast, they have the lowest score variability. So this means that they seem to be playing a more consistent game. Perhaps this lends to the fact that they're able to play a little bit more of an independent game. Like we said, these are two very just play good Warhammer armies, and you'll tend to do quite well. And we see that again with Brandfast. Even if you lose, you're still able, if you are playing good Warhammer, to get a pretty good significant point secure that happens for yourself, or victory points. Needguard, same idea here. You have all the tools to play really good 40k, defensive stratagems, offensive stratagems when you need them, super efficient, and just very good at taking primary and holding it. And then what we see here with Delve is that it has the most variable scores when we look at what makes up these averages based on the standard deviation and CV. And again, what I think this means, as I've alluded to a couple of times now, or mentioned even, is that it's a detachment that really does kind of just go all in, right? Like it's a melee pressure detachment, but it's very reliant on your berserks connecting their damage. And the unfortunate reality is that these guys are extremely swingy. And I think a lot of people kind of could disrespect them, even if you have the threat of all of those good toolkits that we mentioned of like advance and charge, high threat projection, very fast movement, melee pressure. Sometimes you just don't roll fours. And I think that's a big issue. I seriously think that's a big issue with Delve in terms of its consistency, even when we look at just berserks and other detachments as well. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that with all of this data, as I alluded to and mentioned, is that there are no statistically significant differences that were found. You know, I was feeling particularly neurotic tonight and decided to run a bunch of different statistical tests on all the data we had available here for 3 hours. So I did like a two-way ANOVA, I did a Levine's test for variance, and a chi-square test as well. And what we saw is basically there is just no significant difference at all between any of these detachments and any of these metrics that we looked at. There was a difference only between the scores between a win and a loss, which makes sense. Usually when you win by a lot more than when you lose. But that was the only significant difference that existed across all of this data. So what are my final takeaways after 30 minutes of chatting, 30 minutes of stats and looking at lists? Well, based off of this event specifically at WCW 2025 for Leagues of Votann, we can say that these 4 detachments have very good internal balance. They are all functioning and operating within the very same margins, very, very close performances in terms of victory point scoring, in terms of overall scores, in terms of win rate, and there's no significant difference between any of them, statistical significant difference, I should say. What this also means really is that what it comes down to in terms of what you will do best at when you play any one of these 4 detachments is really going to come down to your play style and what you value in a list. We already saw looking through the actual lists themselves that there's kind of a pattern of what units people are taking inside of those detachments. It's kind of dictating what your overall archetype is when you play the list. And I think that's a consideration you need to take in mind when you decide to choose one of these detachments to play with. What you value in a game of 40K, what you value in terms of play style, I think is offered here very clearly between all 4 of these detachments. And we kind of supported that theory by looking at the descriptive statistics and what they actually represent in terms of how you want to play the game. What the drawbacks are, what the strengths are, and how efficiently they can play 40K. That's all I got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment for me down below. Did any of these statistics surprise you? I certainly was. And if you enjoyed this and want to see more videos like this, please let me know down below as well, and I will definitely make an effort to make more of them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.